All right, everybody. So I'm here with the infamous Brandon Barfield. He is, you may know him from Doctors Without Quarters or from social media, or maybe he did a lecture at your school. But now there's a little bit of a brand change. You can talk a little bit more about that. But we're here now with the face of student loan professors, Brandon Barfield.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's pretty exciting. Doctors Without Quarters. I mean, we're not as big and popular as we'd certainly like to be with the medical community, but I think we've gotten a pretty decent brand awareness since we started the company, and so changing our name, kind of a big deal. And I'm the first one to admit the new name probably isn't as catchy as the old one. I tell people pretty straightforward. Creative names are easy to come by. .com web domains are not. It is really hard to find a .com web domain that's not taken. And so we listed out like 6 or 7 different name ideas that we liked, and student loan professor was the only one literally that we could get a clean web address for. And
Oh.
so here we are with the new brand. But yeah, we did rebrand. In fact, the new website went live this past week, and currently I just got off a call. We're currently working on the redirect from Doctors Without Quarters to student loan professors. We're not taking down the old website, and the new one you'll see if you check it out. It's actually dual branded. We're not doing away with the Doctors Without Quarters brand. It's again it's pretty popular, and we like it as well. But the reason we're doing this is that even people in the medical community, like I went to a hospital HR directors conference a year and a half ago, and a few directors, even though our signage is all up with the bullets on what we do, a couple of them stopped by. They're like, "Oh, Doctors Without Quarters, so do you help with housing?" Or and they just didn't get it. People that, if you're not a physician, you just don't get the joke about
Hmm.
Doctors Without Quarters. Of course, if you
Yeah,
are a physician, you absolutely get the joke about being a
100%.
cash
Yeah.
strapped residence, and our name has always given us a good laugh and a smiles. I love opening presentations, but at the end of the day, we want to grow like any other company. We want to serve more borrowers, and some of the strategies we employ, yes, they're physician specific, but many of them, like public service loan forgiveness, they're not. They reach across all degrees, many professions. And so, yeah, we kind of want a name that's going to be a little more obvious as to the industry that we're in. And we want people to come work with us so we can help them regardless of what they do. So ultimately, that's why we changed the brand. We're still going to be very much focused on the medical community. That's going to be probably 80+% of our business for who knows how long, and we welcome that. But for that other 20%, those other borrowers that we need help, we don't want them to feel like second class citizens working with us. And so we're excited about the name change, even though we're under no illusions that some in the medical community probably aren't going to like the new name as much as the old name. And that's just kind of, it is what it is.
Oh yeah, I mean, Doctors Without Quarters is a very catchy name. So I can understand where going from that. Like, I feel like it would be very easy, or it would have been easy for you to find your domain, like your web domain, with that one.
Mhm.
But I completely understand the change up to the student loan professors, especially with you doing so many other things. I will say though, you do have a pretty big outreach on the medical community. I mean, we spoke kind of before this, but you've done things for my school. My medical school was St. George's. You've done things for them. A lot of my co-residents, you gave a lecture at like William Carey and a couple other places.
Yeah.
And even on I think I was on IMRA the other day, like on the main website, and I clicked on a
Yeah.
sidebar and it just said Doctors Without Quarters. And I was like, oh my God, he's everywhere.
Yeah, literally just yesterday, I sent a whole new like page content layout and text for them to completely redo their resource site because wording things a little bit better
Hmm.
than they had it. But yeah, I mean, we've worked hard over the years to get the brand out there. I mean, not just for our company, but one thing about student loan professor. We love doing education. I love doing webinars and presentations. My partner I founded the company with, I mean, after a decade, more than a decade of giving talks, it was starting to wear on me a little bit. And I'm like, I'm not there. My favorite part of the job is getting in front of an audience or getting on a webinar and just diving into this stuff and having people say, wow, I feel so much better than I did an hour ago about my student loans. And that's a pump for me. That's the rewarding part of the job. And so we worked hard to get the content out there, and the brand kind of goes with the content. So it's worked well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm hoping that by the end of all this, I will also be happy about my student loans. I am curious though, like how did this all get started? Like how
Oh,
did you and your friend or your partner get this started?
yeah. So, I mean, I won't lie. I certainly didn't go to college with dreams of being a student loan advisor, right? I don't know that anyone does, to be candid with you. So I came out of the Army. I did 4 years in the Army. It taught me one thing: Army life is not my style, right? I realized real quick that I was an enlisted soldier in the Army. I didn't have a degree yet, and that taught me real quick the value of having a college degree in general. And so I majored in finance. Always liked money. And I like talking to people. So I majored in finance with the aspirations of being a financial advisor and planner and sitting down, helping people. I think I was a little naive to how much sales is involved in financial planning. It's about 90% sales and about 10% planning. That's very
Mhm.
unfortunate, but that is the industry. But I was lucky. I went right to work for a financial firm that wasn't big into sales. They had some good channels to drive clients. And so I was a assistant financial planner and with a group based out of Atlanta. And for 2.5 years, all I did was hardcore financial planning, reweighting people's portfolios and running cash flow projections. It was mostly retirees with $1 million plus. And it was all about making their retirement strategy and their assets and their investments work. So minimum distributions, just all sorts of stuff, and just learned a ton. And then 2007, 2008, 2009 came along with the Great Recession.
Mhm.
And boy, financial job, they were the first ones that just took a whack. And the firm I was at, they were all AUM, assets under management. That's how they made their money. So literally, they saw their revenue get cut in half in about a year period. And of course, we saw people get let go. So I found myself jobless right in the middle of the Great Recession,
Ooh.
and you couldn't find a job anywhere with the word finance in the title. And the one job I did land upon was working in financial aid for a big online school. And so I took it. They gave me a free MBA. You get free tuition when you work for a school. So I think the MBA they gave me was worth more than the actual paycheck. It was a pretty modest, pretty humble time in my career. But even that school went through a big audit, and it was a nasty audit. They were a for-profit school, unfortunately.
Mhm.
And so I found myself with, a couple of years of financial planning, a couple of years of student financial aid. I was like, those don't really go together, until lo and behold, one day I got an email from a company that said, hey, we do financial planning for doctors. We primarily focus on their student loans, and we're looking for people who kind of understand both worlds. And boom, all of a sudden I had the perfect resume and background,
Yeah.
right? And
Mhm.
so they hired me, and as their presenter and your relationships manager, to go out and build relationships with schools. And that really took off. It turned out to be my knack. I love giving the presentations and developing the relationships, and that went really, really well, until they found out the owner of that company was actually cooking the books. He's in
Oh.
jail right now. And we were all just like completely sidelined. It had nothing to do with the student loan business. The student loan business was very legit, but he was trying to ramp up this other business on the side, investments, and he was cooking the books for that. And when it finally went down, it took down the whole enchilada with it. And once again, I found myself, looking for my next move. But we had developed a great reputation. A lot of the schools that work with us, I mean, they wanted me, right? They liked the presentations I'm giving, and the the content was, it's federal based programs. Like, we're not making up PSLF. It's not some sort of scam, right? And so my coworker and I, who was also a presenter at that company, we said, you know what? It's time to do our own thing. And
Mhm.
so we took all the good from the old company, we got rid of all the bad as far as the service model, and we
The
shopped it
cooking of the
out to a
books.
big financial firm called Larson Financial. We had bumped into them in a lot of residency programs. They had a really strong reputation with medical residents and young doctors. And we said, hey, you guys need to partner with us. And so essentially, they gave us the capital we needed to start Doctors Without Quarters. And that was early 2015. And the rest is history. This year, we passed 10,000 individual borrowers, mostly doctors, about
Mhm.
87, 88% doctors is our client base that we've counseled as of this past graduation season. So yeah, we've come a long way of it. It's quite the
Man.
story. It never was planned. Certainly, 20 years ago, this is not where I saw myself, but that you can see the smile on my face. I absolutely love what we do. It's not for the faint of heart, especially with these student loan pauses and everything else. It's been a tough 3 years. But man, I wouldn't trade it for the world. I really love what we do here.
Yeah, what a glow up, because you have grown so much. It's hard to imagine that it's only 8 years, because it feels like your company, for one, could not have picked a better demographic to go for, because people in healthcare do not, tons of debt, and have no idea how. I have no idea how I'm going to get rid of mine yet. I'm hoping, people say get your money to make money. I've yet to figure out how that works, but when I do, it's going to be a game changer. But it feels like you've kind of got like a you're just part of the medical community now in general. Like, everybody kind of comes and listens to your advice. I know a lot of people. I mean, I followed you on Instagram just to figure out all the stuff, like you were saying, over the past 3 years with all the loan stuff. Like, you're
Yeah.
one of my good sources of information on current information when it comes to that, like really quality information.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah, I mean,
young doctors are interesting because you're so focused. I mean, the amount of study and the amount of information you guys pack into your brain over a 4 year period, especially that first 2 year period, right? When you're on the academic side of things, it boggles my mind. I could never do it. But at the same time, yes, the most common phrase we hear from any borrower we sit down with, well, number one is, oh my God, did I really let my debt get that high? But
yeah.
number two, we hear it all the time. I'm just not good with finance. I'm just not good with money, or it's just not my thing. And honestly, I get it. You're talking to a guy. I literally thought I wasn't going to graduate high school in time because I could not pass chemistry, and I had to retake second semester chemistry my junior and senior year because the neutrons and the protons, they just didn't click with me. And that's how I think a lot of doctors are with financial concepts. It just doesn't click, especially if you haven't been formally trained in finance, right? And so we very much we get where people are coming from, and I get exactly where people are coming from. And so it's a neat experience to be able to take obviously very, very smart people, but just kind of clue them into how certain things work. And it's a very niche. We're not trying to make people financial planners. We're just focusing on a very niche area about how student loans and student loan programs work so that people can make better decisions. And that's the beauty of the service, is the service is ancillary. Some people take advantage of it, some people don't. The education is what we're all about. The old company was all about, well, you just pay us and we'll take care of your student loans. And that's not what we do here. We educate people on what their options are. If we went out of business tomorrow, our clients would be fine. They know exactly what's going on with their loan repayment strategy, and they just choose to keep us in their back pocket. And that's how it should be.
Yeah, and that's great, because you said it best. It's like reading two different textbooks. We love one textbook, don't pay attention at all to the other one. And it can just be very difficult, because there's a lot of hoops that you have to jump through in medicine. And so, especially with the loans and everything that you take out, or just the school, I mean, schools are so expensive now in general,
Mhm.
that you have to go, that it feels like just give them whatever they want, and then I'll focus on what I want to focus on, and then I'll look at that later.
Yeah.
Then when you look at it later, you're like, geez, what did I do to myself? I didn't realize I was going to pass this debt on to my kids. No, just kidding.
Yeah, we've started a new financial literacy course now where schools have been asking us for over the years, hey, can you speak to my first year, my second year students? I'm like, well, I can, but I don't necessarily have content. So we finally built out content, and the first year session, and frankly, I think some students get bored with it because they already kind of get the whole budgeting, saving money concept, but some don't. And so the whole first year session is just about understanding how interest rates work, the different types of loans, but most of it's about budgeting and just really practical tips to save money. And it's and
Mhm.
you get like this bipolar feedback. Like the feedback's like 50-50. This was boring. I can't believe I had to sit through this. And the other 50% is like, wow, I'm so glad I sat through this. You probably just saved me 50 grand on my total student debt tab over the next 4 years for things I just never thought about. So, again, it's trying to get everyone to that same kind of base level of
Mhm.
knowledge, so they're better off at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, I can say for one thing, I at least appreciate all the information. And plus, like, you're very up to date with everything that's happened um in the news and everything. You try, I mean, I've seen you put up many posts, especially recently, because it seems like every other day the student loan stuff is going, they're either going to forgive it and then they're not going to forgive it. And then so you've had your work cut out for you over the past couple years.
Uh, we have, and of course, the recent climate's been challenging, right? Because literally stuff's popping up every day. No, that I had a rude awakening. I was finding that I wasn't plugged in enough, and I was seeing headlines come from different sources, and sometimes we'd have borrowers reach out to us saying, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And I hadn't even heard about it yet. And so I made a very conscious decision about 6-8 months ago. I said, you know what, we have really got to step up our game, especially with this rapid pace. So I've actually got a regimen now, and my team does, of very particular sites that we are literally checking on a daily basis, just scrubbing them for all the latest student loan news. Some are news outlets, some of them the educational websites, legislative, government websites. I mean, we really, really try hard to be at the forefront of seeing what comes out, and then we try to post it on social media within about 24 to 48 hours, but we try not to send too many emails unless it's something really, really critical, like the Supreme Court decision. We kind of just gather it and then we put it in our monthly student loan updates. Because one thing I hear about all the time is just the ridiculous amount of emails
Mm.
medical students and residents get these days. And people are telling me I don't open half my emails anymore. And so we try to send no more than one, maybe two emails a month because we want people to actually read them. So social media is kind of where we try to stay really, really up to date, and then let our newsletters and marketplace updates do the rest.
That makes sense. Yeah, I get so many emails that I actually was notorious. I'm getting better at it. The more that my job depends on it, but like I was notorious for just letting emails slip through the cracks every now and then, and because I just got so many.
Yeah.
I don't know if you just heard that. It sounds like Jackson's got some excitement going on. There's just gunfire in the back of
Oh, wow. It didn't come through the microphone. So that's
Hallelujah.
good.
Okay.
I
Well,
got a guy
we'll
cutting
have to cut
grass
that
across the
part out. Yeah.
street. Hopefully that's
All you
not
heard
coming
was
through my
like
microphone.
ambulances, and then you heard pop, 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 pop.
Oh, wow.
I was like, that doesn't sound like that doesn't sound like fireworks. But either way. So I am very curious to begin with about, because with all the recent news that's coming in and out, should I even really be focused on paying the loan back immediately when it, because I guess I have a little bit of federal and private loans, and I am curious with everything that's coming out and the new presidencies and everything else, should we be focused on the paying off the loan immediately, or is it going to be forgiven one day, or is it?
Yeah. Now you mentioned private debt. That's, as you know, that's a
That
whole
one's going to be on
different
me.
animal, right? You're not going to get those private loans forgiven. Though one thing I will point out, there's a difference between loan forgiveness and someone else helping you pay back your student loans, like a military repayment or a National Health Service Corps repayment or an employer sponsored repayment subsidy. If you find yourself taking advantage of those sort of programs, usually they will pay back private educational debt. So if I had a chunk of private debt in addition to federal, I'd probably be proactive looking at some of those sort of programs. But of course, the big programs you hear about, like public service loan forgiveness, is really the big one that so many physicians are positioning for. And now we're finally starting to see forgiveness happening with PSLF. It's just shot up in the last literally 2 years. But the answer is, and I hate to say it because I like to be conservative with my financial advice, but the truth is that no, you probably shouldn't be rushing to pay back your federal student loans too early in your career, because statistically speaking, and I don't have hard stats on this, I'm just telling you what we see with our client base, you generally got a 50-50 chance of finding a job after training that's either going to be government or nonprofit and qualify you for public service loan forgiveness.
Okay.
And the cool thing about that program, and we can get into the weeds with it if you want, but we don't have to, but the cool thing about that program is tax-free at the federal and state level, and it completely wipes out all of your debt, including accumulated interest. And so the deal with that, if you think through it strategically, it's like, well, if I think this is a possibility, not even a certainty, if I think this is a possibility, the last thing I want to do is be paying as much as possible or paying ahead on my student loans, because if lo and behold, I do end up getting them forgiven 10 years down the road or 5 years, however long it takes you, I'm going to look back and I'm going to be mad at myself because I could have just kept that money in my pocket and had twice as much forgiven, right? And so that's one thing we coach borrowers on is if you think any chance that loan forgiveness is going to be in your future, I actually don't recommend paying ahead, but that doesn't mean you have to either. You can always kind of put that, let's say you got $1,000 in your monthly budget as a resident, or even 500, and you're only paying maybe 200 as a resident if you're on income driven repayment. I tell borrowers to take that extra 200 or 300 in their budget, pretend that you're making overpayments, and maybe open up a special savings account, title it your emergency payment account or whatever, pump those extra dollars into there. And that way you've got that chunk of money sitting there 3, 4, 8 years down the road. When you do inevitably figure out which direction your career is going to take you, you do have the option to kind of in a lump sum pay aggressively on your debt at that time. And so you're not behind the 8 ball. And so what you're doing is you're kind of, we in finance call it hedging your bet, right?
Yep.
And so you're kind of hedging your bet there to kind of get the best of both worlds. If I get forgiveness, great. I've maximized that strategy. If I don't get forgiveness and I'm paying back my debt, that's fine too. I've essentially paid ahead in the years that I could afford to.
Okay. That's really good advice. Yeah. I definitely want to dive a little bit more, and we've got a lot to talk about, but I definitely want to dive a little bit more into the public service loan forgiveness, because I think that's a great tool. I'm, for one, kind of going for it, mainly because, medical school and everything can be expensive. And I actually chose a program that I knew that because if you're in residency, anybody listening that is in residency, or like, it counts towards those 10 years. One thing I didn't realize is that you had to make a certain amount of payments on the loan. I think it's like 20 or something payments straight up on the loan, and have the 10 years, and then you can get it forgiven.
Yeah, it does get confusing because generally speaking, when we hear young doctors talking about PSLF, they're mainly talking about it being a 10-year program. And practically it is. But here's what the rules actually state. You have to make 120 on-time payments while you're on an income-driven repayment plan and while you're working for either a nonprofit or some sort of government institution. Now, government can be federal, state, local, even tribal counts. Okay. And so they won't let you double up the payments. It'd be nice if you could like make 2 payments a month and make it a 5-year strategy. Of course, that's not they wrote that in the rules. You can't do that. So it's a minimum 10-year strategy, and practically it's a 10-year strategy. But I encourage borrowers, the number of payments is what matters at the end of the day. because there's a good chance that maybe you work a couple of years in the private sector. Maybe you just got some gaps. For instance, we see borrowers all the time. They graduate residency in June. They take the summer off. They don't start practice till, say, September. Right there, that's 3 or 4 months that's going to push them past the 10-year mark, right? Because if they
Mm-hmm.
work full-time employed during that 4-month period, that does not count toward PSLF. And so again, you have to understand the rules, but as a general mindset, yeah, it's roughly a 10-year strategy. And yes, you've hit the nail on the head. Residency does count in about 90% of circumstances. I make that statement to say there are a handful of residency programs out there that are in for-profit settings,
Mm-hmm.
most notably your HCAs, your Hospital
Bingo.
Corporation of America. That's one of the biggest for-profit hospital chains out there. And they specifically like to buy up hospitals that have residency programs and start up their own residency programs because you're their main recruitment pool.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's unfortunate from a PSLF standpoint. Not that HCA is a bad company. I've never heard really good or bad things about them. But if you're in a for-profit residency program, unfortunately, your time and training is not going to count toward PSLF. And that catches a lot of borrowers off guard. They match, obviously, they apply for match at the end of year 3, beginning of year 4. They don't hear us present about PSLF until a couple of weeks before graduation. And they're like, uh-oh,
Mm-hmm.
I wish I would have been seeking out a nonprofit training program during my interview process. I wish I would have had this information a year ago. Right. And so that is unfortunate.
Yeah, and it's hard to go through all the literature and figure out what programs allow you to do certain things. I remember that I only knew about this because my mom, who she had gone to an organization. She's an ER physician, and she was working, and she had like 6 years under her belt for the PSLF.
Mhm.
But then the ER that she was working for got bought out by Apollo or one of those for-profit organizations.
Yeah.
And then it essentially, she never got to a point where she was able to, she never went to a different place where she could get that all paid off or
Mhm.
work those other years for a nonprofit. So, which she got it all paid off. So one way or another, it worked out for her.
Yeah.
But it was just a funny thing because I never thought that if you worked for a place and then it got bought out, then you would actually lose that because it's not a nonprofit organization anymore.
Yeah, and we saw that happen. So we've always kind of known if your nonprofit gets bought up by a for-profit, then that is going to change. PSLF looks at who's cutting your paycheck at the end of
Yep.
the day. What is the tax ID number for that organization or the nonprofit or for-profit? I'll tell you the one that shocked me. So I'm in Atlanta. We do a lot of presentations here at Georgia hospitals. One is Memorial Health in Savannah, and that was a nonprofit system. They got bought out by HCA back in 2018, I think. I was shocked to learn that not just did the practitioners get impacted by that, even the residents now found themselves employed through a for-profit and they lost their PSLF eligibility. That program was sponsored by Mercer School of Medicine in
Mm-hmm.
Macon, Georgia, which is a nonprofit. And my understanding was in most situations, you're technically paid through the GME and the GME is Mercer. And that was not the case, at least not at this particular system. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was kind of an eye opener for me. And man, I felt certainly bad for those residents because a lot of them, we've been speaking there for years and a lot of them were positioning for PSLF. So that's the one thing you always do have to kind of be prepared for. PSLF is never a guarantee. And when that unexpected change happens with your career or employment, you got a big decision to make there, right? Do I stay
Mm-hmm.
with this company and find a different loan repayment strategy? Or do I find a different employment to complement my loan forgiveness strategy? And of course, I'm never going to tell a doctor change your career path to get loan forgiveness, right? That you didn't spend all this time and effort becoming a doctor to let your student loans dictate where you work or how you work. The truth is, we see more and more physicians tell us every day that they are making career decisions, at least in part, based off their student loan situation. It's come to that, and that's unfortunate. But 2, 3 to $400,000, it's a big part of your financial decision points.
Yeah, and it can be, I mean, it seems insurmountable trying to get it out, accomplish it all. I mean, hopefully by the end of all of it, I will be able to. But I do have a question about PSLF. If you have a gap, are you still able, like, let's say you work 5 years, your company gets bought out by HCA, or you're a resident, but then you start, so you work a year for that profit organization, and then you switch to a nonprofit,
Mhm.
and then you work those other 5 years, does that count, or do you have to do another 10?
No, so you'll be happy to know. So PSLF is written fairly generously. You can have as many gaps in your timeline as you need, as long as you hit that total 120 payments with 120 months of working in a
Mhm.
nonprofit or government environment. Eventually, you're going to get that forgiveness. Now, what I tell borrowers is that there is a point of no return. Like if you're out of the nonprofit and you're working in a for-profit sector 3, 4, 5 years, of course, you're making payments on your loans during this entire time. Eventually, you hit a point where mathematically, even if you did get back under a nonprofit, what would happen is you would end up actually paying off your debt before you hit that
Mm,
120th qualified payment. And so you do have to kind of think about it mathematically. Generally speaking, what we find it's that first job post training. 85-90% of the time, when someone matches to a nonprofit, especially if they've got a longer training, say 4 years, 5 years under their belt, usually they're going to say, okay, I'm going to stick with this job. A lot of times that first contract is going to be 4 or 5 years anyway. I'm going to stick with this job at least long enough to lock in my PSLF, become debt free. Then the world is my oyster, right? I'm not saddled with debt. I can take my career anywhere and do anything, probably find a job that pays more money. Oftentimes there are discrepancies between nonprofit and for-profit
mhm.
compensation. That's just the reality. Um, but if they come out of training and they take a for-profit job, more often than not, they're going to abandon the PSLF strategy at that point. But that's not a hard fast rule. We do hear physicians tell us, you know what, I took this job because I didn't have a lot of great choices. I needed to get something locked in for now. I'm only doing it for a couple of years. I'm definitely not planning to stay here any longer than I have to. Okay, that's a person I'm going to say, let's keep the PSLF door open. Let's keep you on that income driven or payment plan, and let's see how let's circle back in a couple of years to see what direction your career is starting to guide you.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, it really is just, I guess it's a person by person basis, which I
Yeah.
guess it makes your job a little bit difficult, because every person is going to have different wants and needs, and you've got different borrowers with each one. But I mean, it's just, man, they're still.
You're still getting that
I
background.
was like,
Um,
man, I don't know. I was like, hopefully,
that's
luckily the
funny.
siren stopped.
Jordan, this is probably a good time to tell you, for those who want to dive a little bit deeper in PSLF and hear me present it, formally, educationally. Uh, we do try to keep at least one webinar on our site at any given time, either a recent webinar for graduating physicians or one for residents. We don't keep them up very long because again, the stuff changes so often. I don't like to
mhm.
keep dated information. I just posted a resident webinar. I did it for Johns Hopkins House Staff Council a couple of weeks ago, but I intentionally made it kind of generic as an on demand. That is on our website right now. So if anybody wants to formally see how we present this stuff and get into the fine print and the details and the strategy, you're welcome to go check out that webinar to fill
Okay.
in some of the gaps here for sure.
What's the website domain? Like, it's Student Loan Professor and Doctors Without Quarters? Either one can get you there?
The place I'd prefer you find it is studentloanprofessor.com. Uh,
Okay.
Google is so new. Google's not even like if you punch in student loan professor, our website won't even come up. It literally just went live this week. But if you type in studentloanprofessor.com, it will come up and there's a resource tab and you'll see webinars under
Okay.
the resource tab. And I can see the link to that as well if you want to post it in some way.
Yeah, yeah, we'll definitely post it. Now that you've upgraded to like the new website, you've got all this running, is there any different functions to the new website that is different than the old one?
Actually, no. So, and even the old website, if you just Google DWOQ, we will pop up. We're going to keep that live, and it's just going to redirect to the new one. But you almost think you're in the same place. We intentionally duplicated the DWOQ website, and we created, and then we dual branded. So you see the DWOC, we call internally they call us DWOC, but Doctors Without Quarters, Student Loan Professor. You see the two logos there side by side.
Mhm.
We literally made it a mirror image of the old site. So a lot of barbers, the resources they're looking for are going to be the exact same place that they're used to finding them.
That's probably for the best, just so that people don't think it's two different websites. Like they can
Yeah.
see it, and then once
Yeah.
people get acclimated, then you can start
And,
making
and
changes.
I literally, I did not want to necessarily have to change the name of our company or change our website. The people who know a lot more about digital marketing than I do, they told me they're like, you can't have two sites running with identical or similar content. You really have to kind of pick a horse and ride it. And so they told me you gotta go with one or the other, at least as far as the URL, the domain goes. You don't want both those sites running at the same time. So that was a tough decision for us. But yeah, that's the way we went.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly makes sense. And with if you're trying to get yourself out there and you're trying to reach other students outside of medicine, and there is a lot of other students, or there's a lot of other people with student loans that aren't just in medicine. I mean, there's probably a
Yeah,
lot of debt in the medical field, but it's also all over the place. So
yeah.
I,
Well,
I,
I tell you, it's quite shocking how expensive some of the grad help programs are getting. The PA programs and the nurse practitioner and just like everything. If it's graduate level and it has anything to do with healthcare, the prices are getting insane. A lot of things that used to be 2 and 3 year programs are now going to doctoral. You got PAs now that are having to get 4 year degrees.
mhm.
I mean, it's getting to that. It's really, and I won't get into the reasons behind it, but there's a lot of suspicions as to why it's going that way. But yeah, I mean, doctors are definitely not the only ones struggling with student debt these days, not by a long shot.
100%. Yeah, if I had to put my tinfoil cap on because there was this whole push, especially in like my generation, to go to college, and we all had the federal loans. So it was like you could get into college. If you could get into college, you can go to college. But then it seems like every single year that even since I was in high school up, college has increased and I'm the oldest of seven, so I have a bunch of little siblings. So I've
Oh
seen
wow.
all of them go and do the same thing. And college was expensive when I went, but then it's only increased at every
Yep.
school, even like the public and private institutions have just shot up. And so I think it's got something to do with everybody being allowed to go to school, allowed the colleges to increase their price. Well, now I mean, they're almost all for profit. I mean, they make so much money. They might not be for profit, but they're making hand over fist.
Yeah, and I don't pretend to know all the finances that go on behind the scenes, but I do find, and your listeners that are osteopathic doctors will appreciate. Well, maybe they won't appreciate this, but they'll at least appreciate that we understand what's going on. We do find that most of the medical programs that are popping up are osteopathic schools. It's a lot of smaller private schools. They'll launch an osteopathic program. We see a massive new building get built, and obviously that's expensive. A lot of these schools, because they are private nonprofits, they don't get the federal funding in and the state funding like your more traditional state medical universities do. And so I'll put it this way: when I'm talking to, say, a UNC, a University of North Carolina School of Medicine, in my presentations I'm showing debt levels of like 250ish. I used to say 200, but of course those are gone up as well. When I go into most osteopathic schools like an LMU or a Pikeville or whoever it happens to be, I'm showing debt levels between 300 and 400,
Mm,
because on average, osteopathic schools, the cost of attendance and the resulting debt levels, they cost about 100 grand more, about 50% more than their corresponding allopathic programs. And that's unfortunate, especially when you see that, by definition, most osteopathic doctors are going into primary care, right? They're not doing as many anesthesias and, plastic surgery and things of that nature. We are seeing more that are going into higher paying specialties. And certainly emergency medicine, you're not living too frugally, right? That
Yeah,
pays
we've
fairly
got
well.
plenty of, yeah.
Yeah, but
Yes.
it is unfortunate when we see that, your family practitioners and your pediatricians are often coming out with the highest debt levels. But that's the beauty of PSLF. It's an obvious, solution to that. But again, not everybody's going to get it. But those same schools, we then a few years later, we see them launch the PA program and the other complementary grad help programs, and they tend to be a little pricier as well. So I have to bite my tongue on some of that stuff. I mean, we like the schools bring us in. You'll never catch me bad mouthing a school or anything like that. But when it comes to the plight of borrowers, we certainly see what's going on, and we certainly get it. It's not for the faint of heart, and you have to have a plan to
Mhm.
deal with it for sure.
Well, to protect your connections with the schools, I won't rant and rave too much. Nah, I went to an international medical school, so I definitely understand that huge jump because those are also very expensive. They may even be more expensive than the DOs, but not by much.
Yeah.
So it's a lot. It's just a lot to deal with. I've also noticed that, and it seems like the public like loan forgiveness to be one. Student loan programs have become very like politicized in the news recently too. So it's like one place has a stance, one doesn't. And so I was interested if you could speak more on that because that seems more uh, the general topic of discussion.
Yeah, and it's kind of a pet peeve of mine. I'll keep it professional and neutral today for sure. But I mean, I've been doing this since 2011. Okay, so I've seen programs come and go. I've as I get older, I do get more into politics. I pay a lot more to not just presidential elections, but like congressional stuff that's going on, things people propose. and and I've certainly noticed that, student loans have become a major podium stump, whatever you want to call it, topic. Okay, they are not a secondary issue anymore, and um, regardless of which side of the aisle that you're on, or even if you're in the middle, there's one thing that has become very, very clear. I think to everyone who follows politics these days, there is a very clear stance where the Democratic platform stands on student loans and repayment of those loans, and where the Republican conservative platform is. And it's this simple: the Republicans slash conservatives basically have a mindset: you took out this debt, you need to pay it back. Yes, there are some borrowers who have, financial circumstances, they need different types of relief, and they generally seem to be for that. But when it comes to this notion of mass loan forgiveness, or these newer income driven payment plans with the ultra low payments and the rising poverty levels, thresholds, they are definitely pushing back on that stuff. They feel like a lot of the newer programs are too generous, and that they're basically letting borrowers off the hook too easy and not making enough people essentially pay back the debts that they signed up for. And again, I'm not saying that's necessarily my opinion, but that it's very clear that's where that party stands on the issue. Now, on the Democratic slash liberal side, if I'm allowed to say it that way, some people get offended when you say liberal. I'm just kind of grouping those two in general. They're not
Mm-hmm.
always the same, of course. But on that side of the aisle, you see a very opposite mindset and approach to student loans, and that they take the approach that, generally speaking, college has become too expensive. Generally speaking, college graduates don't make what they should be making. Generally speaking, as many people as possible should go to college. It should be part of the American dream. You shouldn't have to sacrifice your firstborn child, to pay for it. And it should be affordable on the front end and the back end. And of course, the front end, it's getting harder and harder. They can't force the schools to do this or that. They're looking for solutions to force the schools to bring down tuition. But one thing they can affect is what it costs you to pay back the loans, or should you even pay back the loans in full. And so what we've seen progressively over the years with each new control of Congress, or anytime we see a new Democratic president in the White House, such as we saw it with Obama, and then we're seeing it now with President Biden, we see more and more progressive student loan programs roll out that, generally speaking, are more generous to borrowers. And so things like bringing down the amount of payment, how much of your income, if you're on an income driven payment plan, well, how much of your income should your payment be based off? How much should your payment be? Should you have to pay back all of your debt? Or should you only pay it back for 20 years and have it forgiven? 25 years, or 20, 25, and then 20. Now with this latest SAVE plan for undergrad borrowers who don't have graduate level debt, they've got a range forgiveness between 10 and 20 years based off how much debt they've got. If you've got $12,000 or less in student loans on the new SAVE plan starting next year, you're going to get loan forgiveness in 10 years, not working in the public sector. All undergrad borrowers with 12,000 will have their remaining balance forgiven after 10 years under this new plan. And so we've never seen anything like 100% interest subsidy. This is a big deal for residents. One of the big things about residents going through training, yes, the income-driven payment programs are helpful. They help you position for public service loan forgiveness. But on average, a resident would rack up $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 in additional interest. They come out of training 4 years later with an extra 50 grand on their student loan tab. Well, they introduced repay 6 years ago, 7 years ago, and they had a 50% interest subsidy. This new SAVE plan has a 100% interest subsidy. So what that means is I can now go through training, keep my payment between $0 and maybe $200 a month is all it climbs to under these new payment rules. I'm not going to accumulate a dime in interest. This new SAVE plan is probably going to save the average resident 30 to 40 grand over a 4-year training program. I mean, it's really, really generous what they're doing with student loans. Now, of course, all that in theory, depending on how you look at it, comes from the taxpayers, right? Or it adds to the national debt. So that's why it's such a huge debate. It's not that people don't want to be generous for borrowers. It's just that some parties are focused more on the cost of programs or how you're paying for programs than they are whether or not the programs are reasonable or even justified. And it's a hot debate. Honestly, I don't like to get into it. Our policy around here is, hey, we look at what's available. We help borrowers maximize the programs available. Our opinion on it, frankly, is irrelevant.
Yeah, it's almost better to just have an objective view as opposed to like a sentimental view, because it's very tough. Because I personally, with me having the skin in the game of the loans, hearing about all the different payment plans and everything, like every time I hear about a better one, I'm like, oh, hallelujah. Because the last thing you want to be doing is, I mean, as a medical student, you are paying to work in a hospital. Like you're paying to go to the school, which is you're accruing debt to work like 80 hours a week if you can, which it feels like you shouldn't have that be adding interest on top of that. But at the same time, the money's got to come from somewhere. And so it's just so hot. Like my uncles always told me never to talk about politics at a party. And it's such that issue, because it feels like even if the Democratic side chose to give loan forgiveness, the thing about politics is the other side has to choose the other stance, even if, so.
Yeah, and that's why it's important for your listeners to understand, regardless of where people stand on the issue, once again, is irrelevant. You have to work with what you've got, right? So my best advice to your listeners and to all borrowers, especially physicians out there, you got to think a couple years ahead, and you need to pay attention to who's in control. Who's in control of the White House? Who's in control of Congress? So right now we've essentially got a split Congress. That's a good and a bad thing. It stops either side from doing things too extreme, but it also means nothing's really getting passed. So in the last several years, we've seen very little come out of Congress. They are doing things like improving the studentaid.gov and some other stuff. But when it comes to big policies, Congress hasn't done much. But what we have seen is right now we've got a Democrat obviously in the White House, and we've seen that they are doing as much as they can unilaterally to make things life better, generally speaking, for borrowers. Now they're getting challenged for that, so I'm sure I don't need to bring your readers up to speed on the Supreme Court decision, right? I
Yes,
have no
yeah,
doubt
yeah.
every person with student debt was following that case very closely. What they probably weren't following was when they heard that SCOTUS shot down Biden's you call it forgiveness, I call it his cancellation plan.
Yeah, essentially.
Um, what most people didn't bother doing was reading the actual opinion by Chief Justice Roberts. Go look that up and read it. They did not mince words. They didn't just strike down this particular plan based off this particular piece of language in the law. They broadly made comments about, generally speaking, we don't think you've got the power to do this. We don't think this is what Congress intended in the Higher Education Act or the HEROES Act. We think that it should be Congress that forgives student loans. Even Nancy Pelosi came out. I'm sure she regrets it now, but even Nancy Pelosi came out a couple of years ago and said, no, the president doesn't have the power to do this, right? And so, but that's not going to stop this administration and probably future administrations from doing everything that they think is in their power, and maybe even a little stretch beyond their power. They're going to roll the dice and they're going to try their best to push some of this legislation through. And now we've got already hints. The Biden administration came right out after the Supreme Court decision. They knew it was coming, obviously. I think it was within 90 minutes of the Supreme Court decision being public, they were holding a press conference rolling out the three-part, what the media has dubbed as Biden's Plan B. But first thing on that agenda, we are coming with another broad-based loan forgiveness cancellation plan. Now, of course, they're paying attention to the opinion. They're trying their best to find more legal ways to make it more, subject to scrutiny and push through that scrutiny. The next time around, things like negotiated rulemaking, some procedural stuff they're going through this time they didn't go through before. I think we're going to see the same. There's going to be a lawsuit filed. Someone's going to find a way to bring it to the court. It's going to go back through the whole appeals process. It's going to end up probably right back before the Supreme Court. Now, I'm not an attorney. I'm not an expert when it comes to the legality of stuff. Obviously, the White House is going to think through this. They're going to try their best to make it pass the court scrutiny. At the same time, the court made a very broad statement when they made their opinion, and who knows how it's going to go. Okay, the court may not even be the same makeup, right? A justice could come and go between now and then. But one thing that's very obvious, this administration and probably future Democratic administrations, they are not going to stop pushing. They are very serious about providing debt relief for borrowers in ways that we've never seen before. So it's going to continue to be a hot button topic on both sides. And so back to my original statement, you need to pay attention to who's in control. So if you're graduating and all of a sudden you see a Republican wins the White House next year, or the right side of the aisle takes over Congress, you better take advantage of whatever plans you can get into and get grandfathered into them. There's a good chance some rescissions are coming, right? They're going to do their best to claw back the more generous plans that are out there to make them a little bit more, let's call fiscally conservative, for lack of a better term, and just less generous as far as borrowers go. And man, I can't empathize with your audience enough how frustrating that is, right? When you're making student loan decisions, you're deciding how am I going to manage my debt? Can I afford to take out this much debt? Can I afford to take this job? I'm counting on loan forgiveness. How freaking difficult is it to know that every 4 years or 2 years or whatever, that program may be in jeopardy, or the program's going to change dramatically? The only sunny side to this is that there is a precedent for grandfathering. Like they're doing away with the pay-as-you-earn plan next year. They're not kicking anyone out of it. They're simply saying, hey, we're giving you a 1 year full notice. You can't sign up for the pay-as-you-earn plan 12 months from now. So if you want to get into it, you better get into it now. Never once in the 12, I guess I'm going on 13 years I've been doing this, never once have I seen, even proposed, that the rug somehow be pulled out from under existing borrowers trying to pursue loan forgiveness or income driven payment plans or anything like that. No one is trying to be, unfair to borrowers. And so, like when the Trump administration and their budget proposal tried to do away with PSLF, that was never going to happen. But even if it did, there was an extremely generous, it was like a year and a half on ramp for that new provision to go through. Anyone who had ever taken out one loan, even 1 year in undergrad, they were going to be grandfathered in all the way through school, and they could pursue PSLF beyond school. That's
Okay.
pretty generous. And so I wouldn't stress too much about changing legislation. If you're already, once you're graduated, if you lock in certain programs, you're fairly safe at that point. But yes, while you're a student, changing legislation, it is what it is. When you graduate and you look at your menu of options, that's where you got to think about what's available to me now, lock in the best option. If things get better, sure, I can switch over to a better plan. If things get worse, you just ride out the plan that you're on.
Okay.
That's kind of the mindset.
It certainly is a lot to consider, but you actually had a lot of really good advice there, especially about, it's all about the timing and who is technically in office. Now, I know as a student going into a resident, you don't really get to choose, oh, okay, I want the Democrats in office while I'm in residency, but when I get out, bring on the Republicans. You don't get to choose that option, but the advice of picking and choosing your battles and paying attention to who's in what office, that's actually really important, especially with it changing so much. Like and I don't know if you've heard about this, and I may be a little off, but I heard that a Michigan court or a Michigan judge had actually he ruled in favor of the loan thing as opposed to the Supreme Court, which made no sense how Michigan could agree to it. I don't know if you've heard about this, like the Michigan
So I
court.
don't know if it's Michigan specifically. The big headline from the last 2 weeks was that there was another lawsuit filed to block mass loan forgiveness, and that confused a lot of people. So that's probably the one you're talking about.
I'm sure it is.
What specifically the Republicans are trying to block right now is called the income driven repayment one-time account adjustment. Now, this has essentially no bearing on current students and very few residents. What's happening right now is they did the PSLF waiver for a year, and on the heels of that, they announced what's called the one-time account adjustment. It's basically the same thing. What they're doing is the administration basically came out a year and a half, 2 years ago, and they said, you know what? We recognize these programs are complex. A lot of people, they were on an income-driven payment plan, but they didn't have direct loans. They had the older FFEL loans, or they were working for a nonprofit thinking they were pursuing loan forgiveness, but lo and behold, 8 years later, they found out they weren't on the right payment plan to qualify for forgiveness. And so what the administration did, they came out and they said, you know what? We want to basically go back and give people back credit, regardless of the type of loan you had or the type of payment plan. Maybe you have some short payments or late payments. If you've been in payment 20 years, we think that's long enough. We think you deserve pay as you earn 20-year forgiveness or whatever program applies. And that's what they're doing right now. And so right after the Supreme Court decision, within, I think it was a week, the first big chunk of forgiveness resulted from that one-time account adjustment. These borrowers all of a sudden got back credit. And for many of them, it didn't just get them closer, it put them over the hump to get either PSLF or income-driven repayment forgiveness. And boom, the initial number the White House rolled out was like 800 million or 400 million. I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head. We put a blog up there on it to cover it. And of course, it made all the headlines and it caught the Republicans' attention. And then that's when they filed the lawsuit, and it took a little while to work its way through. Honestly, that cat's out of the bag, that genie's out of the bottle, whatever you want to call it. You can't go back to so many 800,000 whatever borrowers and say, nope, we're reinstating your loans at this point. That's done. And in fairness, the administration announced this initiative a year ago. And so if someone had issue with it, they should have moved much quicker to take that to the courts, not wait until people actually got forgiveness. We knew the forgiveness was coming, but candidly, even a financial advisor. We got a lot of financial advisors that send clients to us and ask questions of us. And a guy emailed me yesterday, is like, hey, my client is a doctor, just got this email saying their loans have been forgiven under the one-time account adjustment. Is this legit? It looks like a scam. And I said, no, it is legit. But the first batch of forgiveness, I think the second batch of forgiveness actually just happened last week, is why they just got that letter. And even he made the comment, he goes, wow, it seems very interesting that a person making nearly $1 million a year is getting their loans forgiven just because they've been in repayment for 20 years. Some people call it interesting. Some people call it unfair. Some people call it justified. Again, our opinions don't really matter here. But yeah, it's a big deal, but it's all a matter of perspective. It's a big deal for, I'll call it, older borrowers that have been in repayment for quite some time. It has almost no impact at all on any of your listeners that are currently in school or recently graduated.
Yeah, all of the listeners, you're still gonna have to pay your loans.
Yeah. But again, there's so much going on. It's hard to just differentiate this stuff, right? And that's why we tried our best to put stuff out on the blog that breaks it all down. And even our blog says, if you're a student or a resident, you can ignore most of this. Don't even keep reading from here down. I think I put something along those lines in that blog article.
No, it's been super helpful. Like you just said, there's so much to take in, and it feels like, because you're very focused, or at least me personally, and a lot of my colleagues and everything, you're so focused on medicine, and it feels like you're drinking, the description is drinking from a water hose or a fire hydrant, essentially. Like, you feel like you either can't get enough medicine, or you are just flailing around to begin with, and you don't want to, you've got so much to learn that it feels like these things just pass by like as little tickers. And you're like, oh crap, I still have a loan to pay back. And then you're like, okay, maybe it's forgiven, maybe it's not, maybe. And if somebody sent me an email that said my loan was forgiven, I would have thought it was like a Nigerian prince scam or something. But you're like, the information that you've been putting out and everything actually has been very, very helpful. Even your company and like the information that was given was how I got my information to like sign up, knowing that I could do the public loan or public service loan forgiveness while I was in residency and everything, which was very, very beneficial. So I guess, yeah, for one, thank you. But I was really curious, like, for some of the listeners because I'm already in residency, but if they're about to like begin their medical journey, or even just, we'll take it at base level. Like, if you're about to begin like college or grad school in general, what would a tip be from you? Like, what would one of your biggest tips be for them starting that journey, financially speaking?
Yeah, and we'll let the underlying condition there be they can't pay for school, right? They have to take out some sort of debt to fund school. I do recommend the federal direct loans. A lot of people are asking questions right now because interest rates are so high this year. I think it's 7.04 for unsubsidized loans for graduate school. I think it's 1.5% lower for undergrad. We don't do too much undergrad. But for grad plus loans, which I'm sure you're familiar with, they are always 1% higher than unsub loans. So for this year, for the 23-24 academic year, interest rates for medical students, for instance, are 7.04 and 8.04. And a lot of people are like, whoa, that seems really, really high. They are high. They're unprecedented high. In the history of the direct loan program, we have not seen them that high. Is that fair or unfair? Or should I shop around different loans? Well, first of all, if you shop around different loans, you're probably going to find your private rates are even higher. Okay, so just figure that out for yourself, shop it out, see if I'm correct on that. I don't spend any time shopping out front end loans. We shop out refinance loans, which are even better than the front end loans typically, and I can tell you they're higher. But generally speaking, the federal loans are competitive. But as far as whether or not it's fair, when I was first starting this in 2011, student loan interest rates were fixed: 6.8 for unsub, 7.9 for grad plus, and 8.5 for the older FFEL Grad Plus, which they phased out that same year. And a lot of students, that was in the 2010s, early 2010s, interest rates were super low in the marketplace. A lot of students were complaining, right, that this isn't fair. And so the Department of Ed looked at it and said, you know what, you're right. Let's take a standard, the 10-year T-bill, which goes up and down with market conditions. And every May with the T-bill auction, what do T-bill rates go at in the month of May? We're going to set student loan rates based off that rate. Of course, there's a fixed spread, basically a markup in there for administrative fees of, well, I don't know, it's just a markup at the end of the day, but there is a markup. And that way, we'll use that as the standard to set student loan rates for the following July for that academic year. And that way, if market rates are low, student loan rates are low. If market rates are high, student loan rates are high. Well, guess what? Market rates right now are sky high because the Fed is trying to fight inflation. It is what it is. Hopefully they come down next year. Okay. And we predict that they will. But even with rates being relatively high, I still recommend the federal loans. You've got these generous subsidies, such as the new SAVE plan, 100% interest subsidy. That's crazy. I still can't get over that. You've got loan forgiveness. You've got income-driven payment. You got flexibility. If you're not making a ton of money after school, you're not going to be drowning in student debt. And just generally speaking, the federal loans have a lot more provisions and flexibility. Even the interest accrual, it's simple interest accruing. It's not compounding every year, every month like a credit card. The rates aren't variable. They're not going up and down, which that can be a good thing sometimes, but generally speaking, fixed rates tend to be better than variable in most situations. And so there's origination fees. The origination fees are catching some hot water. Your unsub origination fees a little over 1%. Your Grad Plus origination fees like 4 and some change. A lot of people are asking, why does the government need to charge me an origination fee, right?
I don't even know what origination fee is. That
origination fee is if I borrow $100,000 for this semester, if it's you can't borrow $100,000 unsub, but just for example, if I borrow $100,000 unsub, they're going to tack on a little over $1,000 right off the bat. If I borrow $100,000 in Grad Plus, they're going to tack on $4,000. It's just a straight up fee that goes right on top of the loan balance as soon as that loan gets originated. It's a one-time fee.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But generally speaking, I do still recommend borrowers, good or bad. I think that the federal loans have the best overall potential, and of course, it's the only debt you have any chance of maybe getting forgiveness one day. So I think it needs to be a pretty extreme circumstance if you're funding your medical school, especially with something other than federal debt, because you do have that forgiveness potential kind of floating around out there. Whether your chances are low or high, it's still a chance, right?
You got to keep praying.
Dumb and Dumber 20 years ago, you're telling me there's a chance, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so I do recommend the federal loans. Aside from that, borrow as less as you have to. I made my opening statement. The number one thing we hear from borrowers when we sit down on our consultations, man, did I really let my debt get up that high? I wish I would have done this. I wish I would have lived more frugally. The number one regret for graduating medical students, they look back and they didn't live as frugally. There is a phrase you need to learn right now: live like a resident. I'm sure you've heard that plenty of times, right, Jordan? What does that mean? It means I'm basically poor right now. I need to act my wage. If you've heard that, a lot of medical students, I'm not trying to lecture people, a lot of medical students living on borrowed money need to act their wage. Okay, your wage is zero. And just embrace it. You're talking to a guy that came from the Army. I went through basic training. I made like $25,000 a year as a private in the Army back in the day. You want to talk about living frugally and being basically poor, you just embrace it, right? Everyone around you's in the same boat. So you look for cheap stuff to do and cheap stuff to eat. And you just embrace that time of your life. And, eventually you're going to make great money. But if you will have that mentality going through school, borrow as little as you have to, and of course that's a result of living a certain way, I promise you will be so much happier when you graduate. Even if the number is 350,000, you're like, what, that number was going to be 400,000, but I did this and I did that and I brought that total down. I'm happy with that number. Relatively speaking, within the things that I can control, I'm happy with that number.
Yeah, that's very good advice, because the living like a resident is very true, because even after the first couple years out of your residency, or even when I'm in residency, we can like moonlight, where we can go work as the physician and actually get paid, kind of like what a physician would actually make at these other hospitals. And to do that, all of a sudden your income shoots up. Like I make my monthly income in one shift if I do a moonlight shift.
Mhm.
But also use that money, still live like a resident. Don't use that money to buy a new car, because it's really hard not to keep up with the Joneses. If you work in the ER and there's a spot, and all the spots are Lexuses or all these fancy cars, and you've got this surgeon that parks beside you with a big old Corvette.
Yeah.
Then you don't want your rinky-dink car there. Well, you should just embrace it in a way.
But it's coming, right?
Yeah.
Those days, your time is coming. You just have to be patient. But my goodness, you guys spend so much time in training. I couldn't imagine spending so many years waiting for your real payday. So I get
Then you're just like,
the struggle is real. I get it for sure.
I'm curious though, like what for the people that are still in school, like what their forgiveness will look like in 2 to 3 to 4 years from now. I'd heard things about like the SAVE program and stuff, but
So two things. Back to PSLF, that continues to be the greatest opportunity for physicians, especially now. If I'm talking to IT professionals or a dentist, I did just a webinar just last night for the American Student Dental Association. Maybe 5% of them will get PSLF. That is not the forefront of our conversation when I'm talking to dentists, but for physicians, because of how the hospitals and other health systems are set up, it's still a big deal. By the way, when I say hospital, health system is the greater terminology to use. There's so much consolidation going on in the healthcare these days that they're going, like I'm in Atlanta, we've got 4 big systems here. They're all nonprofit, and they're buying out all these private practices and their other hospitals. So what we're seeing is more and more physicians are finding themselves working for these big entities, which may or may not be a good thing. But one thing good about it, we find more and more providers in different specialties that are employed now through a nonprofit who maybe 20 years ago would have been employed in a for-profit private practice setting. Okay. So PSLF is going to be on the rise. I see more providers, generally speaking, especially physicians, getting PSLF 5 or 10 years from now than I do right now. And that's a good thing. The numbers have already gone from before, at the start of CARES COVID, it was like just over 1 billion or less than 1 billion have been forgiven. In 3 years' time, it's gone up. I don't know what the latest number is. It's like $40 billion that's been forgiven under PSLF. Like it just boom, because people finally hit that 10-year mark where they've been these income-driven repayment plans. Now, aside from that, like I said, the save plan really is a game changer, and so probably will be programs that come behind it. Normally speaking, we see physicians use income-driven repayment plans short-term during training because you need that budget relief, even if you're not positioning for forgiveness. And then they decide whether or not they're going to pursue PSLF. And if you do, you need that IDR, that income-driven payment plan, to kind of get you. That's your vehicle to get you to PSLF. So those two things kind of go hand in hand. Again, if you check out the webinar, it explains that better. But most physicians, if they don't end up going down a nonprofit, they usually abandon the loan forgiveness and the income-driven repayment plan at that time. They do something like a refinance. Hey, let me just drop the interest rate on my loan, do a SoFi or a Laurel Road or a Credible. There's lots of different refinancing. It's something we help with for free, by the way. Let me just drop my interest rate and pick a pay down, a 10-year, a 15-year, a 5-year, whatever works in my budget. And that's going to be my loan strategy. And you just check the box. Like it's kind of like a mortgage, right? I don't look at the balance on my mortgage most months. It's just part of my budget for the next 20 years. That's kind of your mindset on your student loans when you refinance.
Yeah.
Here's what I'm getting to, though. As the income-driven repayment plans become more generous, we've been modeling these things out, like the SAVE plan or what they call IBR for new borrowers. Some of those plans actually model out pretty good long-term. If you've got $350,000 and you're going into, say, primary care, if I were to model that out for 20 years, it actually has you paying back less than you would pay on, say, a traditional 10-year pay down. The question is weighing the math savings versus the practicality, is having to deal with changing legislation and married filing separate tax returns and unknown income. Like, I don't know what my income is going to be 10 years from now. I'm going to forecast it, but you know what's going to change. There's a lot more work and variables and uncertainty that goes into that long-term 20 plus year forgiveness strategy as compared to, say, a refinance and just set it and forget it strategy. Right now, most physicians choose the set it and forget it strategy. They say, you know what? Even if I'm a pediatrician, I'm still making a fairly comfortable salary. I can afford to pick a loan repayment strategy, even if it's not the cheapest strategy in theory. It's affordable. I've saved some money by cutting my interest rate, and I can afford. That's one of life's conveniences, basically, that I can afford, and I'm going to choose to go that route. Is that mindset going to change as the IDR programs become more and more generous? Maybe. I don't know. I'm the first one to tell borrowers it's not all about the math, right? You have to have a repayment strategy you're comfortable with, that's going to be good for you long term, that you know fits your financial goals and values and just kind of where you want to be. And that, again, that's a personal decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely hard weighing all of the factors that go into it. I'm certainly glad that we have, you know, people like you that can actually, that understand it a lot better, that can kind of spread the information well and understandable. I hope everybody listening today has been able to get something from this conversation, because I mean, I certainly have. I feel like I've learned a lot. You've been very well spoken on the topic. I know you're a very busy man, Brandon, so we won't keep you much longer, but I just want to say, for one, thank you. Anybody that was listening, please go check out studentloanprofessor.com. Was that correct?
That's it. Or again, you can go to dwoq.com too, and that'll get you the right place one way or another. So either way, use both names. They'll both keep working for the foreseeable future.
Mm-hmm. And you're on Instagram and all the social media. It's under the new name though, Student Loan Professor, right?
Yeah, most of our social media handles are SL Professor. Okay. If you want to search for that. And one thing I learned this week is when you first search, you have to, a lot of the search platforms, they've got like a category: people, companies, videos. You have to search where it says company or organization, and boom, that's when we'll pop up. So I'm not super social media savvy. I've had to step way outside my box, because obviously if you're growing any company these days, you have to be good on social media. And if I had my way, I would delete it all from my phone, just to be honest with you, because it's such a distraction. So I've had to learn a lot along the way. We got a good marketing team, so they tell me what I need to know. And that was one of the lessons I learned about social media this week, is those categories make a big difference when you're searching for stuff.
No, it's a lot to take in, especially, I mean, with me, I feel like I would delete it all as well. But
yeah,
people like you though that understand the knowledge should be on there spreading it. So yeah, there's a lot of other misinformation, or things that are being passed around. So
we're doing really more TikTok these days, and that's something like, I was never on TikTok, but the demographics show that more and more of you and your peers are on TikTok. They're saying young doctors specifically are spending a lot more time on TikTok, and so they told us to get on there. Frankly, it's been a lot of fun. It's a lot more fun to just create a casual 3, 4, 5-minute video than it is to type some blog and have it edited. So we've been trying to post up videos at least once a week on recent topics.
Yeah, and I mean, my wife specifically, if she wants to look up something, or even if we were like when we visited Italy, places to go, she looks that stuff up on TikTok. And
nice.
And if I type in student loan forgiveness, I'm sure on TikTok it will your face will pop up. But
I hope so. I need to try that one.
But Brandon, it was so good speaking to you. Thank you so much for coming, sharing the wealth, and just being an overall good sport today. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I do so many webinars. Honestly, this is one of the first interview podcasts. It's been nice just to have a conversation about student loans and the environment and the plight of young doctors these days and other borrowers. So this has been wonderful for me. I've enjoyed the experience, and I wish you and all your listeners the best of luck. Again, I know large, 6-figure loan debt is not for the faint of heart, but there's good programs out there if you just take the time to learn them, whether it's through us or the government resources. Studentloans.gov is becoming more and more robust. They put a lot of effort into making that a better resource for borrowers. So just do your research, get the knowledge out there. It's out there. And I think you'll find that your student loans don't have to be a big burden, not during school, not after school.
I love it. And go check out Student Loan Professors. Thank you,
All
everybody,
right.
for
Take
listening.
care, Jordan.